Good evening, comrades and friends. Welcome to our biannual Gwyn Alf Williams Memorial Lecture. For those who might not know about Gwyn Alf Williams, he was a renowned Welsh historian and activist, known for his Marxist-influenced radical interpretation of Welsh history. He was a passionate Republican and nationalist. He was a member of a Communist Party in his youth before becoming a prominent figure in Plaid Cymru. In 1974, or from 1974, he was professor of history at Cardiff University. He focused on modern Welsh history and radicalism. He became well known for his TV series, The Dragon Has Two Tongues, with Wynfor Vaughan Thomas. He was celebrated for making Welsh history accessible and exciting for a broad audience. So tonight we have Guto. Where is he? Where is he? Sorry, I thought he was sitting here. Sorry, Guto. Former founding member of the Welsh Socialist Republican Movement, and now he is in a Communist Party and is the branch secretary for Pontypridd. Guto is a retired railway worker, branch officer, and regional delegate with the RMT Union. Tonight he's going to talk to us on the Welsh Socialist Republican Movement, its history and lessons for today. So prepare your questions. Okay.
Diolch. Thank you. Well, it's a great honour. It was something of a shock to be asked to present the Gwyn Alf Williams lecture this year. An honour, of course, because of the man that we commemorate, the historian, Marxist, patriot, proud Dowlais Merthyr boy Gwyn Alf, who, small of stature, communicating with a slight stammer, was a larger-than-life character who projected himself and his ideas onto the minds of so many of us back in the 1970s and 80s. Those were the decades when Gwyn Alf was in his pomp in terms of popularity, especially so with the screening, as we just heard, of the TV series The Dragon Has Two Tongues. It was a turbulent time politically in Wales, in Britain and beyond, and it was the era during which a political entity came to the fore in this land, the subject of this lecture, the Welsh Socialist Republican Movement, which I'll refer to tonight as it was back in the day as the WSRM. As I said, Gwyn Alf was a Marxist, a one-time member of the Young Communist League and the Communist Party, also a patriot and a Republican, who later became a member of Plaid Cymru. His political migration in a way reflected the identity crisis, the split personality of the WSRM itself, which with hindsight, I believe, was the main reason for the movement's subsequent demise. The WSRM, to quote the Welsh poet R. Williams Parry, when he saw a fox fleetingly cross his path on a remote mountain top, digwyddodd darfi megis seren wyb. It happened, it ended like a shooting star. The movement lasted only a few brief years. To an extent, it lit up the political sky in Wales before it imploded into its own black hole. So to put everything in a historical context, there had previously been a tradition of die-hard republicanism with a definite socialist leaning in Wales. Amongst its ranks in the 1950s and 60s were prominent figures such as Gyda Davies and the future Labour MP and Lord Gwyn Alf Davies. Some of the old Republicans, such as Cliff Berry, and the poet Harry Webb became involved again as revered old-timers in the newly formed WSRM of the 70s and 80s. Again, looking at the history and at the 1970s in Wales, towards the end of that decade, Margaret Thatcher, of course, came into power as Conservative Prime Minister. There was a calculated attack on the traditional heavy industries in Wales, coal and steel, and the trade unions that represented those workers. The first referendum for devolution ended in a heavy defeat. And just across the water in Ireland, there was big trouble brewing that culminated in the death by hunger strike of 10 Republican political prisoners. All these were significant factors woven into the creation of the WSRM in 1979, which came predominantly from a socialist faction within Plaid Cymru, with Robert Griffiths, Gareth Miles and Tim Richards as the protagonists, who were becoming more and more disillusioned with the ineffective cultural nationalism of its leadership, personified perhaps by Gwynfor Evans. Gwynfor would himself later be prepared to go on hunger strike for a Welsh language TV channel, but showed little fighting spirit in defence of the Welsh working class against the attacks of Thatcherism. I came into the WSRM not as a Plaid Cymru member, but having grown up in the 1960s with Che Guevara and Ho Chi Minh as heroes from afar, with an awareness of the Prague Spring and the Paris insurrections, and closer to home having childhood memories of the Aberfan disaster, the drowning of Capel Celyn under the Tryweryn Reservoir, and the investiture of the Prince of Wales, along with the MAC, the Mudiad Gweriniaethol bombing campaign in response to it. I was very open to the idea of a Welsh Socialist Republic. I'd been reading a bit of Lenin and James Connolly, and as the WSRM was being formed, Gareth Miles, who was writing a pamphlet about the great man Connolly, asked me to translate some of his essays into Welsh, which was a defining experience for me and drew me head-on into the new movement. I was present at what I believe was the inaugural meeting of the WSRM in Tir Cymru off Richmond Road in Cardiff, where a diverse group of socialists, trade unionists and patriots got together informally to get things going. And so for me began a 4-year roller coaster ride, no doubt boosted by an adrenaline rush of romanticism, sometimes blurred by excessive levels of alcohol, with trips to Ireland and Scotland for clandestine meetings, mixing with Marxist intellectuals and Republican rogues, once or twice getting locked up in police cells, one of which was for firing a flare at the aforementioned and much despised Margaret Thatcher. They were the best of times, they were the worst of times. I must say, from that very first meeting in Tir Cymru, there were red flags, not of the communist variety, but danger signals, that the whole venture might become unstuck. It was a very diverse grouping present that day, many still active in Plaid Cymru, some following a Marxist ideology, some Republicans in the purely nationalistic sense, some, as they be called in Ireland, Guinness Republicans, or as we dubbed them here in Wales, Albright Republicans, a far less potent brew. And at a later date, there was an influx of dyed-in-the-wool anarchists, and the WSRM, over its 4-year existence, simply became everything to everyone, and ultimately nothing to anyone. The political agenda, as projected in its first publication, Sosialaidd Cymreig, Socialism for the Welsh People, written by Rob Griffiths and Gareth Miles, was without doubt Marxist in ideology and based on a class analysis of history and society. And that document is still relevant today, having been reprinted by the Communist Party last year. Maybe the ensuing problem was that not everyone who joined the WSRM was duty-bound to follow its ideology and analysis. I can't remember the term democratic centralism being mentioned in the movement's proceedings at any time. The first official National Congress of the WSRM, following an earlier summer school in Aberfan, was held just up the road from here in Hopkinstown in 1981. And the very first resolution was worded as follows, and I quote, "We declare ourselves part of the international struggle for socialism, for a society where all economic and political power is in the hands of the working class. We believe that the fight for socialism should, in Wales, take the shape of a national liberation struggle, that the working class should, in its own interests, lead the people of Wales in a campaign for a Welsh Socialist Republic." End of quote. There were other motions to follow in that Congress on subjects such as the oppression of women, the Welsh language, industrial and trade union campaigning, the British state, inequality, imperialism, and so on. And a constitution for the new movement was confirmed, based on local branches, or clubs as we called them, feeding into a national committee, with two flagship publications, the Welsh Republic in English and a Faner Goch, of which I was for some time the editor, in Welsh. It seemed that a sound ideological basis and structure had been laid. The reality, as time would tell, was a little different. The WSRM, in line with its Marxist ideology, took an honourable lead in campaigning and marching in support of the striking miners, the Llanelli tinplate and Port Talbot steelworkers, and being the first to commemorate the Llanelli rail strikers killed in 1911. But look back at the documents covering the movement's history now, and you'll barely find a mention of this, only of supposed links with the IRA, of bombing and arson campaigns, all sensationalized by the media. Some standout memories that I have of those heady WSRM days and nights are of marches through Cardiff in support of the Irish hunger strikers and in memory of Bloody Sunday, which whipped up both solidarity and hatred from the local population. Marches through Abergele, led by a fife and drum band put together by former Mac bomber John Jenkins, in which I was one time a drummer, to commemorate his two accomplices killed by their own device in 1969. Of demonstrations, such as the one in Port Talbot, where following a march in support of the steelworkers, led by Newport Labour MP Paul Flynn, we moved on to nearby Margam Park to sportingly wreck a British Army recruitment fair. Of a rally in Llangrannog highlighting the housing crisis in the context of holiday home ownership, where, as a speaker, I shared a platform with the future Lord of the Realm, David Ellis Thomas. Of a riot in Merthyr one Saturday night involving a Scottish fife and drum band, and I do mean a riot of west of Scotland proportions. Of trips to Dublin and Glasgow to meet Socialist Republicans, famous and infamous. Of meeting one day with Nan Milton, daughter of the great Red Clyde leader John Maclean, and that night meeting the mother of Celtic, Manchester United and Scotland footballer Paddy Crerand, along with some IRA volunteers who were also in attendance in a Gorbals pub, the only building, by the way, left standing on a slum clearance wasteland. I promise you there was rarely a dull moment. We carried out our activities often with a sense of humour and of mischief. Again, I'll offer a few examples, if only to lighten the mood of this lecture. In that first Congress at Hopkinstown, a veteran Marxist from Brecon, old Arthur Evans, taking to the stage to propose a motion in support of Albanian revolutionary leader Enver Hoxha. Speaking for his allocated time, before being stood down by the chairperson, who then asked if anyone wished to speak against the motion. And up came Arthur Evans again. As he explained, he agreed with most of what Hodger was doing, but not everything, taking up more Congress time to speak against his own motion. Well, that was democratic centralism taken to the extreme. There was the social event during the Machynlleth National Eisteddfod, for which we sold only one ticket. But as the venue and the bands had already been booked, we decided to go ahead anyway. A huge crowd turned up on the night, packing out the venue to its capacity. And then along came the buyer of that solitary advance ticket. And yes, we had to turn him away. There were the Dear Nick spoof letters to Welsh Secretary of State Nicholas Edwards, which attracted significant media attention. The badges we produced and continuously sold out during the Meibion Glyndŵr arson campaign, bearing the logo of an England's Glory box of matches and the words below, "Strike a light for Wales," along with posters picturing holiday homes with the words of the National Coal Board adverts, "Come home to a real fire." And in a Faner Goch, a cartoon strip based on Mr. Urdd, the cuddly mascot of the very respectable Welsh League of Youth, but this one wearing a beret and dark glasses, armed with a Kalashnikov, known as Provisional Mr. Urdd. Well, fun and games there might have been aplenty, but against a backdrop of serious social unrest in Wales, which manifested itself in extended and increasingly sophisticated arson and bombing campaigns, the WSRM was drawn directly into confrontation with the powers of the British state. Some of the movement's leading members appeared on television, not advocating violence but justifying it, and the WSRM was linked, rightly or wrongly in the media, with a bombing campaign instigated by the WAWR, the Workers' Army of the Welsh Republic. People involved in the movement were arrested, as happened here in Pontypridd, after an explosion at the Army Recruitment Office, which was located just across the junction from where we are this evening. Everything came to a head with the showcase conspiracy trials of 1983 in Cardiff Crown Court, involving many members of the WSRM, including its leading light, Robert Griffiths. Due to the principled stance taken by the defendants and the proven corruption and ineptitude of the police, the trial collapsed, but a great deal of damage had already been done. The Welsh Campaign for Civil Liberties and the Welsh Political Prisoners Defence Committee had previously been formed in response to such gross injustices. Was it the British state and the South Wales Police, then, that caused the demise of the Welsh Socialist Republican Movement? No. I believe they merely exerted one last twist of the knife into a body that was already dying by its own hand. Much of the WSRM's activities, in contrast maybe to its stated ideology, focused on an aggressive republicanism, onto the flames of which later on a measure of anarchist fuel was poured. As noble as were its aims, it was not fit for purpose. Robert Griffiths himself summed it up after the conspiracy trial, and again I quote, "There was an unholy alliance between nationalism and ultra-left anarchism that undermined what the WSRM was intended to become, a socialist party of the Welsh working class. A small number of people were able to disrupt and divide the WSRM because there were contradictions in the movement's political basis for them to utilise." End of quote. And Gareth Miles, the deep thinker behind the movement's formation, had realised early on that it was moving in the wrong direction and increasingly backed away from his leadership profile, although remaining loyally supportive of those persecuted by the state. What are the lessons then, briefly, to be learnt from what occurred between 1979 and 1983 in the name of the Welsh Socialist Republican Movement? And this is the tricky part for me, as I am no political philosopher or analyst. The Communist University meeting here tomorrow will no doubt delve far deeper into the issues of national liberation, internationalism, of progressive federalism and nationalism. I can only tell it as it was. I was a fairly naive 20-year-old at the time going into the adventure that was the WSRM. But the whole movement was naive, thinking that the cavalier actions of old Republicans and patriotic warriors could galvanise a Welsh working class that was being systematically attacked in purely economic terms by Thatcherism, and thinking that events in Ireland could be replicated here in Wales. For all the policies printed in manifestos and Congress resolutions, political discipline did not bind together the grassroots. Without an extensive political education embedded in democratic centralism. The ultimate aim of a Welsh Socialist Republic is a noble one, worth fighting for. But the road taken towards it must be travelled in a principled and disciplined manner. As a Marxist, I apply the analysis, of course, that society is based on class, that the failing capitalist system must be dismantled before it destroys the very earth on which we live, that the working class in worldwide unity must emancipate itself and bring in a new era of equality, justice, peace and hope. That analysis is based on the revolutionary philosophy of Marx and Engels, as taken forward by Lenin. If imperialism is, and undoubtedly is, the highest stage of capitalism, the parasitic, moribund, final stage of capitalism, then the battle to undermine it will be won for the emancipation not only of the global working class, but also of the various nations to which that working class belongs. That would be the practical means to the end. Lenin saw that clearly, as did our own T. Nicholas here in Wales, as did Connolly, Maclean, Che Guevara, Ho Chi Minh, and other great revolutionaries. There's no contradiction in terms in equating class emancipation with national liberation. And why fight for Welsh independence of any kind unless the corrupt and unjust system of capitalism is swept away in the process? Our Welsh identity, our language, as it was at the time of the Merthyr Rising and the Chartist insurrection of the 19th century, can be vital components of the social revolution that we yearn for today. Taking the monopoly board direct route, go straight to an independent Wales, do not pass go, as Yes Cymru, maybe to an extent Plaid Cymru might advocate, without thinking through clearly the class and economic foundations of that new Cymru Rydd, would be a futile exercise. Would that nation remain a dominion, paying homage to the British Crown? Would it be a member of NATO, of the European Union? Would it welcome investment by global monopolies that would continue to subjugate and exploit its working class? Would its economy be manipulated by the corporate banks? Would its health system, transport infrastructure, utilities, energy, wind farms be brought into public ownership or continue to be scavenged by multinational companies? As James Connolly said of Ireland when it was still being ruled from London, but words that would apply to any aspiring nation, and I quote, "If you remove the English army tomorrow and hoist the green flag above Dublin Castle, unless you set about the organisation of the Socialist Republic, your efforts will be in vain. England will still rule you. She would rule you through her capitalists, through her landlords, through her financiers, through the whole array of commercial and individualist institutions she has planted in this country and watered with the tears of our mothers and the blood of our martyrs." End of quote. The path being advocated by the Communist Party is that of progressive federalism, which recognises a common class struggle across the whole of what is currently known as the United Kingdom, and recognises also the unique cultural identities and rights of self-determination of the nations within these islands. A Welsh Socialist Republic can be achieved through this process as an equal member of a federal union of British Socialist Republics. If there's a lesson to be learnt from the existence and the demise of the old WSRM, it is that the road to that ideal must be followed with discipline, with a clear understanding of the class struggle, and that the Welsh working class, a Gwerin, must be in the vanguard at all times as it frees itself from the overbearing chains of capitalism and imperialism. And so I can say tonight, in hope and with certainty, as I did 4 decades ago, forward to a Welsh Socialist Republic, ymlaen i'r Gweriniaeth Sosialaidd Cymreig. Diolch.